dragonfly on the flower. And what we're going to do is we are going to first start by drawing out that flower. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the center of the flower, and it's going to be a quarter circle. So I'm just going to sketch it about here for a quarter circle, around this edge just a little bit more. And I can go ahead and erase right on this canvas. It's not a big deal, just don't put it into your paint. And then I'm going to make these little smaller petals. And I'm trying to make them about the same size as each other. They don't have to be perfect, but about the same size as each other. Just a simple rainbow shape here. Just come around. And then in between each one is where I'm going to start my larger petals. My larger petals are going to stay on the page. So you can see, I'm just going to round the top and stay on the page. And then the next petal be a little bit larger at the top, and then it'll come down, kind of come to about right here in that next smaller petal. And each time, it's just going to keep coming around, and they'll come to the next shape here. It's halfway through. Then I'm going to come down and let it get a little wider here. It's going to come right to there. Let me just erase this. Got a little crazy there. And then as these shapes go on, they're going to start to go off the page here. One line coming here, so you can see where it started. And then this one, I'm going to imagine that it was going to start right about here, so they stay pretty consistent. So they're about the same distance apart as we go. Alright, so that's our first step. Now we're going to have a dragonfly over this, but first we're going to paint this. Then we're going to go ahead and draw our dragonfly. So we want the dragonfly part to be dry so that we can go ahead and paint over it, or draw on it. So we're going to paint these petals first this time, so that way it'll give that time to dry, so that when we're ready to draw the dragonfly, we'll be able to go over it. So what I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to paint this flower pink. So I'm going to take my biggest brush. Notice the amounts of colors I got. I know that I'm going to use more red and white because the main part of my canvas is pink. So I've got larger amounts of those. I've got smaller amounts of everything else. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to mix right on my plate a little bit of pink. Now depending on how light you want it, you want to use less red and more white. And we're going to need a fair amount, so you want to make sure that you mix enough. That should be pretty good to start with. Using my biggest brush, I've got it completely loaded on both sides, and we're just going to paint it a solid pink here. We're not going to worry about doing any shading or anything like that. We're just going to do the solid color. I'm going to turn my brush the thin way when I go to get around these little spaces. I'm not going to press hard. I'm going to go right up to that pencil line. Now again, we want to be able to draw on this, so we want to make sure that our paint is nice and spread out. That way, it's going to give it time to dry. Fix this little edge right here. Nice and slow. Then I had a thick line of paint, so I'm making sure that I spread that out really good. And then I'm just going to continue to do that with each petal. So I'm going to go right up to the edges. Now again, the harder that I press with this brush, the wider it's going to be. So I'm okay with pressing down hard at this top part because I know that the hardest that I press is still not going to be as wide as that flower. I wouldn't want to do it too much here because I could go wider than that petal, and I don't want to do that. I want to keep it, I could just take this whole color and paint this whole thing, but if we take it and we follow this line and we take our brush strokes and we make sure to keep going the way that these lines are going, it's going to make it look more like individual petals. So it's important that we take the time to do that and that we change our brush stroke to make sure that we are matching that up. Now I'm not going to worry too much about if all these shades of pink are perfectly the same, because if you look at a flower, they're not going to be perfectly the same. And though I mixed this on my plate, it's still, you can see in my brush, there's a little bit of red and there's a little bit of white in there, which is what's giving us different color changes, which is a nice thing in here. So I'm not going to worry about that. So again, when I'm at the top part of this petal, I can go ahead and press as hard as I want because it's a wide petal, and no matter how hard I press on my brush, it can't go wider than what I want for these lines. But when I get in closer to the center of this flower, like here, then I want to be careful on how hard I press. Just keep doing the same thing here as I come down. And get into all those little tight spaces. If you want, you can take your smaller brush and fill those areas in. Right now, I'm not going to worry too much about it. You can always do that after. Right now I'm worrying about covering the main portion of this painting. Again, brush strokes are important here. We want to make sure that we're following the lines of our pencil, because that's going to make our flower look more rounded. Whereas if I painted it straight up and down, they'd look very flat. And I'm going to get this last petal in here. So even though it would be easy to just go up and down like this, I'm going to still go ahead and I'm going to keep my momentum going by doing my brush strokes this way. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to rinse off this brush. Really good, dry it off, get it nice and dry. Go into my medium brush here, and I'm going to mix a little bit of a darker pink. I don't want it to be completely red, but I want it to be a little bit of a darker pink. And what I'm going to do with this is I am going to make it so that I can outline my petals. So I want it to be different enough from this other pink so you can see it. And I'm just going to, again, keep that, I want it to be flat. I'm going to squeeze some of this paint out. Now it's kind of flat there. And so I'm going to simply see if I made the right color. And I did, because I can see a difference. And then I'm just going to curve this around. Now look at, I'm not pressing down very hard. I go right there. I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm making sure I have a flat tip. Not pressing as hard as I could, because I don't want it to be too wide. So I'm making sure every time. And I'm going around. Make a little bit more paint on that one. Just going to go ahead and go right back in. No worries. Right back in like that. And I'm just going to keep going. Remember, the harder I press, the wider the line. So I want to be cautious of that. I'm just making one smooth stroke here. And that's my goal, is to make one smooth stroke. Just like that. And then one more through here. Just like that. So now we can go ahead and clean off this brush. Make sure to tap it around on the bottom of that cup. That's what's going to help clean it all out. And do it as many times as you need to get it the majority out. Alright. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my small brush, which I can already tell is to a nice point, and I'm going to take that red. I'm going to let it, again, I want it a little bit darker, but I don't want it completely red. So I'm going to try and lighten it just a shade. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give it this little outline here. So I'm going to find a starting point, take it around, and find a stopping point and lift off. I'm going to find a starting point, take it around, find a stopping point and lift off. And again, find a starting point, take it around, find a stopping point, lift off. And last time, find a starting point, take it around, go right off the edge there. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to rinse this out. And I'm going to fill this in. with that same color. So again, just soften it just a shade, just put just a small amount of white into your red, just a small amount. You want to keep it pretty bright here. We're just going to fill these sections in just like this. And remember, when you're doing this, that you want to make sure you spread that paint out so that it has time to dry. And if we don't spread it out, it's going to be thick and clumpy and possibly even drippy. And then we're not going to be able to draw over it, we're not going to be able to paint on it because it'll all smear. So we want to make sure, and let's say I put a whole big amount onto a spot. What I can easily do is I can just take my brush and just scrape it back off and then wipe it on the side of my plate. No big deal. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to clean this brush out. I'm going to clean this brush out really good because the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to paint yellow, and I don't want it to turn orange, so I want to make sure that it's nice and cleaned out. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to dip into my yellow with both sides of my brush, and then I'm going to fill in. Whoops, I can see some water coming out here. If you look real careful here. So what I'm going to do is I did not dry off my brush good enough. So I'm going to kind of wipe this off, and then I'm going to dry it off really, really good. I simply did not wipe it off good enough. So you want to make sure, if you see that happen, to take that time, dry it off, and then reload it. So now I've got it nice and loaded again, and I'm going to be able to cover this whole area. Now I want to be cautious because I did just paint that pink. So I want to come right up to that pink, but I don't want to smear it. So I'm going to go real slow, real careful. And then it's all painted in. I'm going to go ahead and rinse off that brush again. And now I'm going to make my background color, which I want it to be a little bit kind of turquoisey and make it kind of light. So what I'm going to do, if I want to make a turquoise, turquoise has green in it. So I'm going to first start mixing on my plate. So I'm going to take a little bit of yellow, but turquoise is going to have more blue than green. So I'm going to mix a little bit more blue into my green. So it's more of a blue-green. I'm going to do even a little bit more here. Perfect. And now what I want to do is I want to lighten it, so I'm going to take a good chunk of this white . You can keep it a little bit more here. I want to really soften it up. And you want to make sure it's really, really mixed in here. Twist that brush around to make sure any excess paint is off of there. And then I'm going to go ahead, and I'm still taking this medium brush. Now again, because I already did that outline, I made it a little tricky on myself. But I'm just going to go nice and slow I'm going to take my time. I'm going to go into each corner, and remember, every time I go into that corner, if I want a thinner line, I'm going to make sure that I lift up on my brush, because the harder that I press, the wider the line, the harder it is to get into small spaces. Now again, if you want, you can use that smaller brush again, make it come to a fine point, and then roll it into your paint. And then you can go into all those tiny little areas. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill this big part first, and then I can go back in through those tiny little areas as I need to. You can do it however you are more comfortable. Make sure I don't see any white spots. So what I'll do is I'll make sure that brush is nice and cleaned up. I'm going to take my smaller brush and go in to any tiny little areas that need to. If you're going to anchor yourself to your painting like I'm doing right now, I'm holding the top with my pinky, and that's letting me get a steadier hand. Now if we look, you might be able to see a reflection here. I can see a little reflection right here. I don't know if you guys can see it, but that's where it's wet. So if I look at my pink, I don't see any reflection, which is perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to have happen. So what I'm going to do is know that I can draw on it, but first I'm going to clean off that brush, and I'm going to give my little outline right here with that light pink again. And when I work with this small brush and I'm doing an outline, I want to go ahead and use just a drop of water, thin out that paint a little bit. It's just going to make my outline glide. And that's going to make it a lot easier, and it's going to make it look a lot nicer. Give it a nice smooth edge. Now again, whenever you use water, you want to make sure it's really mixed into your paint really, really nicely. And you want to make sure that if you hold up your brush like this, it's not dripping, because if it's dripping, we know that it's going to make a mess on our canvas. But as always, I'm going to dry off my brush completely, because I want to make sure there's no hidden water that can sneak up on me. And then I'm going to dip into that light pink that I just made, and I am going to go around these edges. It's not going to be a perfect outline because I want a little bit of that pink to be showing here to separate the big petals from the little petals, but it's just to give it a little detail. I'm not doing a perfect outline in the sense that I'm not finding a starting point and finding a stopping point and getting some really smooth line. I want it to be kind of fun and crazy here. And I'm going to do a little zigzag kind of in between the yellow and the pink here, or where they touch, just like that. And then my flower is done. So now what I'm going to do is, because my flower is dry, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw out my dragonfly. Now my dragonfly, I'm going to put his head closer to the second petal here. Now again, depending on how many petals you have, depending on how wide you made them and all that good stuff, it could be a little bit different. And that's a good thing. We all make different things, and as long as you're happy with it, that's all that matters. But if I say the second petal, kind of look at your canvas and see, is it the same as this? Is it similar? Because if I say second petal and your second petal's over here, it's going to change where your layout is. So I'm going to come right about here, and I'm just going to make a little circle for his head, just like that. And then I'm going to make a little curve. It's not straight, it's just a little curve. And it's going to come down here. So it curved out, and then it kind of straightens out at the back here. In this part, we're going to follow that round down, and then we're going to kind of make a straight line this way. So you can see it goes into his little tail. So it's thinner here. And then there's going to be this little dash line that makes it go all around, so you can see kind of where he's flown, like that. And then he's going to have little antennas, like that. And then when you look at a dragonfly, his wing up here is going to be larger than his wing back here. So we want to make sure that we make it longer, and they're thin wings. They're not like butterfly wings where they're wider, they're thinner wings. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to sketch so there's his first wing. So it just goes up and around and back down. And then his second wing is going to be a little bit smaller and come right back down like this. So both of them are thinner as they get closer to the body and wider as they're near the top. But one is longer than the other, so we can see that. So then what we're going to do is we are going to take our medium brush and we're going to make a little bit of gray. Now when we're making gray, we're going to take just a little bit of black. Black goes a very long way. So we're going to take a lot more white than we will black. And even that is pretty dark, so I'm going to take even a little bit more, like that. Now it's nice and light, but we can still see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in his body. Like this. I'm still using that medium brush. And again, the thinner that I want my line, the less I'm going to push. And I'm using that flat edge again. So I'm barely pressing down, and I'm using that flat edge, and that is what's going to get me that nice smooth line. And I'm going to go ahead and fill in his head as well. I'm not going to worry too much about my line. I'll get my little brush for that. And I'm going to make them come together. So you can see he's all filled in there. And now just for a little bit of fun, you can make a little bit of a darker gray, not a lot darker, just add a little more black, and we can kind of darken as he goes to his tail. I can even add just a little bit more so that it's more noticeable. Go right under his belly, go right into his tail. Like that. And then I'm going to get that small brush, so I'm going to clean this one out nice and good. I'm going to get that small brush, and I'm going to first give myself a nice smooth line around here. And then I'm going to take a little bit of black again. Not make it crazy dark or crazy light, but I want it to be lighter than black, but a pretty dark gray. So I want it to be pretty dark. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give his head part of an outline here. Coming around like that, and go a little ways down his body. And go back here, and a little bit more there. I can make a couple little lines on his tummy. They're kind of rounded. I don't want them to be completely straight. They're kind of rounded there. And then I'm going to add just a little bit of water because I want to be able to make some really good lines here. Now, got a little too much water there, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in a different space so the water can kind of flow in there, but it's not as much because I can tell I added too much. So you want to be really careful. And again, the way that you can check it is if it drips. If it doesn't drip, you should be good. But I don't want to take any chances. I don't want any drips sneaking up on me, especially when I'm this close to the end. So I wiped that brush off. I'm rolling it into that paint. It's not dripping, so we should be good. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make his little antennas here. Just like that. Remember with this brush, just like before, the harder you press, the wider your line's going to be. And then I'm going to make a little leg like that. Another one like that. Just got a little leg going. I'm going to add just a little bit of white to that dark gray so that I can do these little dash marks so we can see what kind of adventure he's been on. Looks like he may have been on quite the adventure today. Just like this. Remember, I'm not pressing hard. So like that. And then we're going to go ahead. We're going to use that dark gray again. We're going to give him one little eye. Just like that. And we're going to rinse off this brush. We're going to lighten up that gray. Come back in and just give this little tummy a quick line, just like that. Now if you want to add a smile or something like that for fun, you absolutely can. But you're going to go ahead and again, you're going to roll it in the paint. You're going to make sure you've got a sharp point. And then you're going to very carefully, barely press down and do it. Now my brush is all nice and cleaned off. I got a little bit of water. I'm going to drip it right into my white. I'm going to mix it around so that I can thin this white out just a little bit here. I'm going to check. It's not dripping, so that's a good sign. But I'm going to make sure that water is mixed in really good. And then I'm going to dry off this brush again. No surprises. And then I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to roll my brush right into that paint. And I'm just going to trace these wings. Now I'm not going to fill in these wings. I'm going to trace them because instead of filling them in, I want to make a design on them. And you can fill them in. You don't have to make a design on them. It's up to you. But I'm going to make a design on them. But just like when we've outlined before, I'm going to try and find a starting point and a stopping point. See how far my paint can go. Come all the way around. I've got one wing done. And then I'm going to start up here. I'm going to do the next wing. And again, whenever you're anchoring yourself on your canvas, you want to make sure that your paint's not wet where you're going to put your hand. You don't want to smudge it. And the second wing's done. I can see a thick line of paint here, so I'm going to go ahead and spread this out. I see one here too. Just spread that out. And then I'm going to make my design. And my design, you can do whatever you want. I'm going to do something with a curlicue here. So I'm going to come up, and then I'm going to come around, and I'm going to curl it in like that. Now you can see, if you look closely, I skipped some spots. So I'm going to make sure that I very carefully go back over that. And then I'm going to not stick straight out, but I'm going to follow my curve and come around. But the key is to not just stick it straight out. You want to follow that curve. Makes it look a little more delicate. And then I want to thicken this side up to make it match the rest of it. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the smaller wing. Just like that. And then again, I'm not going to stick it straight out. I'm going to follow it and curve around. Just like that. Spread out any thick lines of paint. I'm going to hold it back. I'm going to check it out. I'm going to see if there's anything that I need to touch up. And I'm going to make sure that I do that. And then when I'm done, I've decided everything's okay, I'm going to go ahead and clean out those brushes so that they're ready for the next time that I want to paint. And that's it.